Morning. Good. So I want to welcome everyone to this session. I'm Bob Wise. I'll be your moderator. And I think it comes that Governor Bush has just set such an incredible atmosphere and environment. So I want to open this with a quote, because what I think it shows is how change should always be part of education. So let me set the stage for the next hour. If we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. What education radical said that? Oh, boy, you're right on. 1945, John Dewey. And so education has to be constantly renourishing itself and replenishing. So in this session, thanks to the XQ Institute and ExcelinEd, we're here to reimagine what high schools should be and the policies that make this possible. I had the privilege of spending 24 years in elected office, another 14 years running an advocacy group, the Alliance for Excellent Education, and I've come to realize that there are two places where critical education decisions are made. The first, of course, are by our teachers, millions of decisions made every day in the classroom, on the spot, no time to reflect, how is it based upon their training, their pedagogy, dealing with individual students. That's place number one. Place number two is all the critical education decisions will also be made by elected officials. At some point, whether it's the elected district school board member, to the state legislator, to the Congress of the United States, to the President of the United States proposing the next legislation, to the state school board, all of the elected officials are critical in the decision-making process of education. And so that's why it's very fitting that we look to always be seeing and then what this session will do, how is it that good practice, and we're going to hear from practitioners who are making something happen, how is it that good practice can shape good policy? But the other way works too is we've seen what the good practice is, how can that practice be leveraged by policy? So good practice hopefully shapes the policy, then policy can help leverage further the practice. So everyone is here because you believe in the equity imperative that every child should have a quality education. But particularly those of you in state government and state legislatures and boards of education and executive branches, you also know there's something else. This is the information age, and education is critical and education is your main economic development policy. I spent, as governor, I was really proud. My first session of the legislature, I pushed through a group of economic incentives that would just knock your eyes out if you were a business leader. You couldn't walk into my state without me giving you a swag bag. I had tax incentives. We didn't do abatements, but I had financing that was just incredible. I wish I could have gotten it on my house. But you couldn't walk, and yet the first question that a business leader would ask me every time was, tell me about your education system. One, because I want to know about the workforce. Second was a little bit more covert question. If I'm moving there, or I'm asking my friends to move their children there, what are the schools like? Education is the economic development future for a state's economic future. So, the statistics bear this out. After the last recession, in the recovery, 99% of the new jobs went to people with more than a high school diploma. Post-secondary, they had some post-secondary. 1% to a high school diploma or less. Another number that gets me, 3 children sitting in kindergarten today, we don't know the jobs yet that 2 of those 3 are going to fill. And to me, what that says is we have to be continuing to make sure they have core content knowledge, but it's, as Governor Bush was saying earlier as well, it's also the ability to think critically, to collaborate, to communicate, and to always be an agent of your own learning how to learn for the rest of your life, because that job that you hold today isn't going to be the job that you necessarily have in 10 years. And so the discussion today is going to be with school leaders who are creating the learning environments that are so important. And I want you to look at, when you have a chance, go to the XQ website, and we're going to hear a lot more about XQ and what it's doing in just a minute. But for practical, down-to-earth resources, State policy guidelines, yes. The one I've come to appreciate is because science is going to, should be influencing so many decisions now. We know so much more about the science of learning and adolescent learning and the fact that there is another stage of development that comes after early childhood and in adolescence, and it's important to make decisions about high schools around that. So I would urge you to go, and then also there are other major modules of resources that are very, very important. And I also ask you to remember something as we talk about, because the teaching force is so important and policies affecting the teaching force. As Governor Bush said, and I've heard around a table today, this isn't just about teaching rote content knowledge anymore. It's about students learning how to learn. And what one district superintendent said to me one time is, I'm not interested anymore in sages on the stage. I'm not interested in guides on the side. I'm interested, our teachers are, I love these words, educational designers. And so what policies and practices is it that's necessary to encourage our teachers truly to be the educational designers? We're going to hear from two school leaders who are creating these vital education experiences. As I said earlier, ideally, good practice shapes good policy, and they're developing and implementing those practices. But good policy can also leverage and spread that good practice. And incidentally, I'll spare you most of Bob's taxonomy of policy development, but one critical element is 80% of the time is urban myth. If we just clear out the legislative underbrush or look in the fact and say, there is really nothing that stops this school or this dynamic leader from moving forward, we can move forward. And so getting out of a compliance mentality and into a can-do mentality, I think is critically important. So everyone has a role in this happening, the policymaker and the practitioner. So in just a minute, I'll come back to Stephen Stapleton, who's the principal at Furr High School in Houston, and also Derek Jensen, the coordinator of PSI High School in Seminole, Florida. Is there something I just noticed? Governor Bush went to school in Houston and was governor of Florida. I don't know whether there's any connection that we have both represented here. But both also are XQ Institute award-winning schools, and we're going to hear their experiences. I'm going to ask some questions and hopefully modeling good education behavior and pedagogy and practice, where you will have the opportunity also to ask some questions. But first, let's hear more about XQ Institute from Jen Ellis, the XQ Director of Policy Engagement.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to keep this very short and high level because I want to get into our really robust panel discussion. I want to give you guys a chance to hear from these school leaders who have this really incredible on-the-ground experience that I think we're all going to find really impactful today. So my name is Jen Ellis. I'm Director of Policy at XQ Institute, but I thought what would be helpful before we jumped in was a little background on XQ Institute. Who are we? What have we been up to since our founding? And also a little bit of framework around the state policy work that we've been doing. There we go. So for those unfamiliar, XQ Institute, we are an organization dedicated to transforming high school education across America so all graduates are prepared for college and career. We were founded in 2015 by Russell Ali and Lorene Powell Jobs, and I want to get into a little about what that founding looked like and the difference that we've seen today. But before I jump into that, one of the primary questions that I get asked about XQ is why we are focused on high school. So I think everyone in this room knows the entire education spectrum is important. There are a number of ways to approach this. There's topics, there's people focused on different grade levels. There's a lot of talk about early childhood ed right now. It is all incredibly important. But the reason that we chose to focus on high school has a few different components. One is that transformed high schools can transform the entire education system. So high learning standards at high school can drive what came before it, so elementary and middle school learning standards. It's also this important touch point for post-secondary options. So it sits at this really unique spot. However, despite having this really important place in our education system, our high schools have made the least progress over the last 20 years. And when surveyed, over 50% of 12th graders say they believe their math work is too easy. Only 34% of 12th graders say they are engaged in school. These are students, 12th grade, who are about to be launched into college or career. That is a really alarming statistic and should alarm all of us. I think does. That's why we're here today. So great opportunity, great importance, and it's not really adding up for our students. The other thing that drove us to focus on high school is there's a lot of new neuroscience research that shows us that high school is not too late for intervention. So during teenage years, big changes are happening in the parts of the brain that control skills like reasoning, planning, and self-regulation. And in fact, some of the new research says that IQ can change in teenage years, in those high school years. So it's absolutely not too late. That's one of the reasons that we chose to focus at this critical moment. So going back to our founding in 2015, XQ, we approach our work from a very community-led approach. So in 2015, we launched a nationwide call to rethink high school that inspired more than 10,000 people to join locally led design teams and participate in a 7-month design process around reimagining high school. So a little bit about what that looked like. I have a map to show you today because I'm very visual myself. So like I said, we had nearly 10,000 people participate. That amounted to about 700 applications to actually launch new, innovative, designed high schools. We got applications from all 50 states. You can see in our impact map right here. Also, members of those teams designing those high schools were from over 59 occupations, and that's something that's really important to us. So that's local teams actually looking at their community, finding resources, finding unique voices to bring to the table, and this is what our challenge was all about. So this is a really great map for us. These 700 applications led to our first 10 XQ schools. These are schools that we actually helped through partnership to open nationwide. This is where we are right now. So we currently have, 17 XQ schools. You could see where they are on the dots on the map. One thing I want to speak to about our schools, our XQ schools are all different because they were locally designed, they were locally led teams. So they're looking at those local communities and saying, what resources do we have to draw on and what do we need? So no two of our schools are alike, we're model agnostic. So for example, we have a school in Louisiana, New Harmony High. They're completely based around being in the Mississippi Delta, the ecological impact there, looking at that in their daily lives. We have a school in Indiana, Purdue Polytechnic, that's actually connected to Purdue University and working on to and through college initiatives with them. We also have Grand Rapids Public Museum High School, which is actually in the Grand Rapids Public Museum, and they use the exhibits as part of their daily learning. I could go on and on about all of them. We do not have time today. We do have good explainers on our website, but my point is that they're all completely unique models reacting to their communities. The other thing you're going to notice on here is we have some red dots. So this year, for the first time, we have our first XQ district in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We also have our first XQ state, which is the state of Rhode Island. And we actually have one that's so recently announced that I don't even have it on my map, which is we have our second XQ district, which is New York City. We are currently partnering with the Department of Education in these areas at different levels to work on not only designing high school, but redesigning high school. And that's been a new process. We've learned a lot from that and really worked on our tools and resources to make them available to a wider audience that is working with currently existing high schools, not just our initial competition, which was about designing a new school. So when we originally launched in 2015, if you were interested in being part of our competition, you got this big paper box kit, which led you through this 7-month process. We still have these, if anybody's interested in getting one. They are heavy, I will warn you, but I can't send you one. This also worked with a series of online modules that is really the backbone of all the work that we do. It leads you through this designer of learning process that really flips traditional design thinking on its head. And this is really the bread and butter of what we do and what we believe in. Because we ask, I think so many times in our lives, not just in education, we start with the question, what can we do? Like, what resources do we have available? Where do we start? We ask people not to start there. We ask them to start in this phase we call discover, where we actually ask them to really embed themselves in what young people need to learn, what they need to succeed in the future. We ask them to look at the learning science, the latest brain resource in science, and then we ask them to really spend some time listening to student voice and understanding the science of all of that together. Only then do we ask them to move into what we call the design phase. In that phase, they're pushed to create something that's bold, grounded in the best available knowledge, and right for their community. After that design phase, only then do they move into the phase we call develop, which is, as you can notice from our modules, I don't know if I can go back, you'll see there are 6 modules there, which are one of the biggest. This is actually bringing that idea, bringing that design vision into the real world and making it a reality. But that's when we tackle those questions. So what we found is that this allows people to really unlock thinking and think of bigger outside the box ideas. Now, ultimately, those ideas have to be able to come into the real world, but we don't want to start with what we think is possible. We want to really question what we think is possible and blow that open. And so this is a lot of the work that we've done. What you saw on our next slide, this is not publicly released yet, so I want to tease it for you guys a little bit today. Those big paper design kits, they're really cool when you get one, but this is 2019, almost 2020. So we are about to launch a new digital platform that leads you through this entire design journey. This is going to be a completely public-facing tool, completely open to the public. It is tentatively called XQ in a Box. However, we reserve the right to change the name at this point, so don't be surprised if you see something that looks like this with a different name. This is that same design process that you saw. What's really exciting about this tool is it's a huge leap forward. We actually have embedded video and multimedia. We have actual testimony from our current schools where you can see what practice looks like. We're able to update it faster with our learning. This has also been really refocused so that it includes, like I said before, information on redesigning high school. Because we realize often the redesign process can be more complicated than just designing a brand new school. And a lot of the districts and states we're partnering with, they really are interested in redesign. So that is all going to be in here. Our release is going to be in 2020. I don't have an exact date yet, but be on the lookout for this. I wanted to preview a little bit today. The one other tool I want to touch base on, and then I want to hand it over to our panel. About a year ago, we put out, some of you may have seen, some of you may not have, a state policymaker's guide called High School and the Future of Work. This is a collection of policy recommendations that we have come to through our work on the ground, through the experts that we've spoken to. The intention here was to help state policymakers think of some ways to unlock innovation in their own states so that if you didn't want to run an XQ design challenge or you didn't want to build a bunch of new high schools, you could still find ways to unlock academic rigor, to unlock local assets and resources. Not only do we have the recommendations in here, we back them all up with data, the science behind why we think these things are important. We also provide real-world examples of where we think this policy is happening so that you can dig into it a little bit further, find ways that you think different communities have adjusted this to meet their needs. These policy recommendations that we have are broken up into 3 big buckets. The first is empowering local communities to design high schools of the future. What we're looking at here is state policies that increase flexibility and innovation, spur on and empower local communities to actually take on this kind of innovative thinking and design thinking in their own communities, ask what resources are available, and how those communities are supported and incentivized at the state level to do this work. The second bucket, which is actually probably our most broad, is making diplomas meaningful. This is that fundamental concept that I know we've been talking about already a lot this morning, that when a graduate walks across the stage with that diploma, it should be a mark that they are ready for their post-secondary options. So this includes everything from developing a profile of a graduate, aligning course requirements to college admission standards, making rigorous courses widely accessible, policies that redefine course to break free from seat time requirements of the Carnegie unit, also things like modernizing career prep and looking at innovative CTE pathways. The last bucket that you'll find in this policymaker's guide is getting teachers the tools they need. One of the things that we realized early on is that even if a state said, we really want to take this on in an aggressive way and pass these tools around seat time flexibility and rigorous education, if our educators aren't ready for those changes or for model changes in the classroom, this is never going to go anywhere. They have to be partners in this work. So what this bucket is looking at is how do we provide teachers with the tools to professionally develop in this space? How do we provide them with resources aligned to learning science, treat them like the professionals they are, and allow them to better hone their craft? So that's what you're going to find in section 3. I do realize that's a very high-level overview, but I want to hand it over to our panel now. One little plug here. The people at XQ who oversee our tech and social media, who are much more savvy on this than me, have set this up where if you text education to 724-665, we can send you some more background on XQ, our full policymaker's guide. We also have some school board focused materials that I didn't go over today, but you'll get those as well. We can also put you on the list to be one of the first group updated when XQ in a Box is ready for release. So if you just text that, we won't spam your phone. It just lets us collect your information really. Like I said, I don't understand all the internet behind it, but they assure me that it works. So I'm going to hand this over to our panel now because I want to jump into a little of what this work actually looks like on the ground. But thank you guys for bearing with me during that.
Thank you, and it's a great moment for me because I actually had the privilege of being one of the judges in 2015, reviewing about 25 of the almost 700 applications. And I have to be honest, as I read them, I was thinking, wow, some of these proposals and some of these concepts are really challenging policy, at least as I know it. And so now, 4 years later, we get to see the impact and how two successful school leaders have dealt with existing policy and also forged new policy. So Derek and Stephen, if you all would talk a little bit, each of you describe your school, a little bit of the process to get to where you are today. And then, of course, the underlying question, and I'll come back and maybe get it from you if it didn't come out. The underlying question is, what policies did you need or did you have to have? What is it that stood in your way? And once again, how much of it were you able to do on your own initiative? So who wants to start? But as I say, describe your school a little bit and the concept behind it.
Hi everyone, I'm Derek Jensen. I'm the coordinator of Sci-Hi. It stands for Problem Solving Incubator. We're located in Sanford, Florida, and we're part of Seminole County Public Schools. We're actually an innovation high school. We're like a school within a school. So we are a problem-based, project-based program that is really grounded in community and business partnerships. We have an embedded business management and analysis career program, and all of our teachers, not just our business teachers, but our core content area teachers, work closely with outside partners, local businesses, startups, nonprofits, community organizations, to get our students outside of school working with professionals in those on content-aligned projects. And that's really our bread and butter, and what we want to do really well is to make learning incredibly relevant to our students, but also to build all of the 21st century skills they need to be successful after high school, and to get connected, kind of to build their social capital and build a network of connections for when they graduate that extend far beyond the high school faculty, which is really important to us. We're part of a larger high school, like I said, which is Seminole High School. It's the largest high school in Seminole County. It's about 4,100 students. So right now, we're in our first 2 years. We have just a freshman and sophomore class. We're at 130 inside of this much larger 4,100 student high school. And it's cool because our students have access to the classes and opportunities of a very large high school experience, but also are part of like a very personal learning initiative that feels like a much smaller school inside of that. And then our district is a fairly large school district. We have about 67,000 students in Seminole County Public Schools and 60 traditional schools in there.
Cool. And so Stephen Stapleton in Fur High School. It's in Houston ISD in Texas. Fur High School is on the furthest east high school in Houston ISD, and Houston's the largest school district in Texas, 7th largest in the nation. And our school is a comprehensive high school, about 1,100 students. And so we have zone students, but HISD is a district of choice. So we do have students who choose to come to our school for some of our program offerings. And so I'm in my second year at Fur High School, but Fur High School is, it's been around for a long time, right, since 1961. But a former principal, 2 principals ago, applied for the XQ grant and received the grant, and we're in our 3rd year of implementation. And so I'm coming in on that third. I'll come in on the 2nd year. And so what's unique about Fur High School is, yes, we are a traditional school, and we're looking at whole school redesign. And what we're focused on is we're one of the only, if not the only high school in the nation focused on environmental justice for our students. And so from developing our teachers, as Jen was mentioning, to focusing on engagement, that's what we're about at our school. And so some of the key things about Fur High School is that our main focus is student voice and teacher voice, and we want to amplify their voice on a level so we can be responsive and design work that engages our students. At Fur High School, we believe that there's 2 things we can control. It's the work we design for students and the relationships that we have with them. And through that, everything else will cause students to learn profoundly, as Governor Wise was mentioned earlier. And so at at FUR, not only are we focused on environmental justice, we kind of have a few prongs running. We're focused on social emotional learning as well. And so we're able to use our XQ funds to really change the model of what you see in urban school districts. And so half of our money is spent on staffing, where we have someone that our students know our students very well. We are able to have grade level counselors, assistant principals, wraparound specialists, and social workers for all of our students, because our students come with a lot of needs. We're 96% low socioeconomic at our school. And so with that comes a lot of needs that we heard about earlier, that our students need some more supports. And the other half of our funds are spent on developing our teachers, providing them resources. I'm a product of the University of Texas's You Teach program, and I was trained to be a teacher, and I believe strongly that a well-supported teacher in the classroom is going to improve academic outcomes. But I know that sometimes, at least at a high school, we don't have long lines of teachers wanting to come to work with us, and we have a lot of alternative teaching certification programs. And these are people who want to make a difference, and so our job as school educators is to train them. So I've partnered with UT Austin and brought in You Teach professors to work with our teachers, all of our teachers. We partner, like Derek's focused on a lot of business partners. We focus also on university partners, and we're focused with Texas A&M, partnering with our teachers to design lessons for our students. And so our model is unique in that, for a public high school, reaching out to our university partners, reaching out to our environmental partners, and reaching out to our industry partners to really work with our teachers to build their capacity to design lessons for students that will empower them and they can understand their community.
Anything? The next question is, so what policies gave you pause, or did you have to, might have been challenges for you? And then the second question, of course, is what policies would help you move forward?
I feel like there's going to be a lot of agreement on this panel about these policies. I think if we're asking our teachers to do best practice in our classrooms with our students, our policies should align with those best practices. So a great example is 2 students who walk into 9th grade, and one of them is essentially college ready when they walk in the door. They could pass, they're going to get a great score on their SAT, they can pass every end of course exam right out of the gate, and they have to take English 1 because we have a very strict linear structure of courses that our students have to take. And then another student who comes in who is several grade levels behind in reading or English and walks in also has to take English 1. And there's not a lot of flexibility in the credit progression. And that credit progression is tied to seat time. So it's very difficult to even work within the structure to allow that one student to opt out or show mastery in ways that are a little more non-traditional, so that we can work on personalizing. Because ultimately, our teachers, what we ask them to do in class every day is personalize and differentiate the learning for the kids in the classroom. But the problem is we have a lot of obstacles that prohibit our teachers from doing that in the most effective way possible. And I think that's why our teachers get really frustrated with us. Because we think we're going to attack it with layers of PD, and I think that's part of the solution, because we have to have highly effective teachers who have all the best tools to do that work with our kids. But I also think we should be supporting them from all angles so that when those 2 students walk into their classrooms, we have some flexibility in our policies that allow us to really personalize the education of those 2 kids in a meaningful way, from a progression of credits to seat time, and the ways they display mastery throughout high school.
Yeah, similar to what Derek said, grading policies and credit policies are something that really hold teachers back. Teachers feel, especially if they're end of course tested subjects, they feel the need to toe the line and for everyone to kind of progress every month and be at a certain level, and students receive grades. And what we found out is we do focus groups, and last week we had teachers bring students in, and after the students left and had their conversations, the teachers had their conversations. And we had EOC tested teachers, but we also had some fine arts teachers there, and one was our band director. And we started talking about competencies. Our teachers are used to labeling kids green, yellow, and red based on how well they do on an exam, right? And so the idea of looking at a standard that the state has and labeling a student's mastery isn't foreign to them. But what is foreign to them is giving kids differentiated work at the same time during the year. So in December, one person may be working on one standard and someone else may be working on something else. And our, teachers have a hard time understanding that in a system where at the end of the year, everyone's given a test and the same test at the same time. And so our band director, he said, well, I mean, that's how my class works. We're competency-based. I have, some students working on notes and tones while I have other students, doing something else. And so for him, it was a no-brainer. And so I think, at the campus level, yeah, we need to bring teachers together of different content so they can begin to have those conversations and see, some of these things are done. But at a policy level, our teachers, it's something they want to do, but it's scary to try, and they don't know how to go about it because there is this metric given at a certain time.
So if I'm a state legislator going home after this, what should I be looking at to give you that flexibility that you're looking for?
I mean, so, some things to think about is, we test a lot, right? We have December retesting coming up for students. And, in Texas, it's not that bad from what I hear from other places. We have, 5 end of course of tests for high school students. But they have to retest if they don't have them. And so, they retest in December, and then there's a test in the spring. And so if there is to guide towards a more competency-based approach would definitely be flexibility in when those tests are administered and how they're administered. We need accountability. We have, our A through F system, but giving, local education agencies flexibility on when that's done. Because logistically, Derek and I were talking earlier, we have positions that are called testing coordinators, and people get stipends to do testing. And, that's a lot of money spent just preparing tests and doing things. And so I think looking at how tests are administered, how frequently they're administered, and when they're given.
I mean, absolutely. I think there's a lot of logistical issues around testing, making them not just easier to administer, but putting more common sense approaches behind the opportunities students have to take them. For example, that student who comes in highly proficient in English, what opportunities are there for him or her to just clep out of it or get it out of the way and move into an advanced English class along a separate progression that maybe is in that same learning space or a similar learning space, but has very different materials and different expectations around it. So some flexibility around test dates for sure. That's also going to introduce issues though when it comes to that seat time equation that's still around in a lot of states. Is how many hours does a student need to be present to show mastery, and then what does that mastery actually look like, and what are all the different ways that student can show it? And then ultimately, funding. What are the funding formulas that allow us to fund schools where students are attaining mastery? Like Governor Bush said, if time is the variable, like what is the funding formula that lets us to adequately fund schools for those students who are essentially skipping large periods of coursework or moving on to others more rapidly if we're kind of basing everything on a more traditional 7-period bell schedule?
Can I add one?
Sure, Jen.
Am I on? One really quick thing here that we hear about at XQ kind of across the board, and a lot of the conversations we have, we'll talk to state policymakers and they'll tell us, we have, these 3 or 4 examples of really great high schools who are, doing this competency-based work or who have this flexibility. But the reality is when you dig into how that school is getting the flexibility, they are essentially doing competency-based education, but then they have to graph it on to the seat hour time on the back end. So there's all these little in-between measures that are being taken, which are really onerous and time-consuming for the school. So I think one thing for state policymakers to be thinking about is if you have a program working in your state, really interrogating how is that program actually working with the current state infrastructure? And even if it looks like on the surface it's very calm, what's actually going on under the water? And are there policy changes that can make that process less bureaucratic and kind of open doors for that system? Because we see that time and again where it looks like one school got flexibility, but when you dig in, there's actually this really convoluted back-end process that's really complicated and makes it so that program can't scale or programs like it can't open elsewhere. So that's one of the things I would caution and also encourage people to dig into in their own states.
Yeah, I would just also urge, as you look at, a lot of discussion here obviously about seat time versus students moving at their own pace, and which underscores to me that the last reform sometimes is today's impediment. And for instance, seat time was an incredible reform, because what it did was to say that every child, rural, urban, rich, poor, was going to have one exposure to 180 days of education. And that was a great reform in 1906. And so now we've moved forward, and so that actually is holding us back. We've got the children in the schools now. We all accept, well, that's a given. Now what do we do to ensure that they're able to take maximum advantage of it? So Jen, I'd just like to follow up a little bit more, because these two schools, one is a XQ School of Innovation within a larger high school. Another is a comprehensive high school freestanding on its own.
Yeah.
So these are two different models, and the XQ schools actually represent a number of different models. There's some other policy observations that you see that are necessary across the board.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we see across the board is, you know, when we come around to communities, I think the response that we've gotten has been really huge. And, you know, we are obviously excited about what we're doing, or we wouldn't be out there doing it. Yet we're even more impressed by the community resources and groups coming forward. And I think one of the things that we believe strongly, but has been reinforced to us time and time again, is that local communities, they know what they need. They have these deep resources. And when you unlock that potential, when you create pathways for them to step forward and give ideas and build things, the results will surprise you. They have surprised us. And we came in thinking we were going to get like huge ideas, and the ideas we got were so much huger than what we actually thought. And that just goes to show that, you know, there is all this great thinking happening. And then as someone who works in policy myself, that makes me go back and think, if we have these communities with these great resources and these great thought processes, and then we have this issue that the community already has a solution for, like what's getting lost from here to here? And so a lot of the work that we're focused on right now is, how do you empower communities to unlock that innovation? What are we doing at the state level to actually incentivize that? So when XQ, when we come around, we have, when we start like our district and state partnerships, we have something we call design days. This is, we actually come hold these public open sessions where people can come hear about what we're going to do. They can start to brainstorm and learn, hear about the process, hear about some of our schools. Things like that just get people thinking. We talk about how to build a team. We actually empower people to go out to just say, start talking to people if you have an idea. Start putting a team together. Like, why can't you if you have an idea? Start looking into this research. And I think when you create that framework for people to start the design process, the rest of the magic just happens. You know, we're not in there being like, like what about, you know, like the community has those resources. So I think one of the things that we've seen across the board, and that I really focus on in my policy work, is how are we continuing to empower those communities? The other side to what we're doing is, how do we ensure that with innovation comes strong rigor? So we don't just want it to be, you know, let's like Control Alt Delete the whole thing, and we'll let anything happen that wants to happen. We want there to be this really strong foundation in learning science. That's why we start with that discovery phase. So, you know, things like looking at equity in our system. Where are there rigorous courses that we know have outcomes for students when they go into their post-secondary options? Where are those courses being offered, and where are they not? And where they're not being offered, is there a real option for students to take them, not just like a little side option or something they have to pay for, which is another barrier they can't access. So looking at things like that and asking, how equitable is the system really, and how do we come back to that and ensure that when we're unlocking innovation for communities, it's for all communities and not just for certain communities. So I think those are the things that we've looked at overall, and that we are constantly, with the lawmakers and the policymakers that I talk to, I'm constantly encouraging them to look at deeper. I'm constantly looking at deeper, and I think learning about every day.
So before I open it up, I do want to, policymakers are always interested in, okay, what's the impact? It's one thing to have theory, but legislation that's just based on theory can sometimes come to grief, and also bring the policymaker to grief, I might add. So if each of you wouldn't mind talking for just a moment about the impact that you have seen, both in student performance, but also in the community.
Absolutely. We're still early in our development, so we're at the beginning of our second year right now, and so we don't have, like, I don't have graduation rate data for you, but I expect it to be incredibly strong. What I do have is our students are performing better than their peers on kind of the traditional accountability metrics, But more importantly, our behavior data is off the charts. Like, we have students coming to our program because we are a program grounded in equity and trying to get students who might not normally choose a program of choice like ours into our school. We have students who spent the entirety of their middle school at behavior centers, unable to be in public high school settings, and now our discipline data is we essentially don't write referrals. We don't have major discipline incidents in our program, despite having students who I think in many traditional school environments would be considered highly challenging. We have students who are like on fire for coming to school and being excited to be there. Our attendance data is wonderful right now. And more importantly, I think because we are a program grounded in partnerships, in just a year and a half of doing this, we have a constellation of really cool highly localized partners, but also international companies that are excited to partner with us, invite students into their workspaces, give students authentic projects to manage and run and deliver on, and kind of invite students into their work because they know the stakes. Our students are going to be their future workforce soon, particularly in high school, and we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm from our partners in the community to tether themselves to a school like ours and give students meaningful work outside of school.
You know, I think as Darius kind of saying is that he sees, changes pretty quick. And, I'd love to say that, everyone says, change takes time and things like that. But I mean, honestly, we're seeing rapid changes in just 1 year in the work that we're doing. And so in 1 year, Fur High School's become the highest performing high school on the east side of Houston, on the east area. I mean, in the accountability ratings, yes, we're a C, but we got a 79. We're like 1 point away, right? And, you really dig down and look at those college and career readiness metrics and students receiving certifications, we see how close we are, to being a B school. And that would be the only, B-rated comprehensive high school in the east area of Houston, which is huge, and which wasn't the case, the previous years. And so assessment data, yeah, we're doing amazing things. I mean, we only had 18 students fail our Algebra 1 test, right? Compared to, more than half of the students the previous year not pass that state exam. And so some of the things that we're doing, we're able to do, with these policy changes, but supporting teachers. And so in addition to assessment, we have attendance wins. For the past 2 years, our attendance year to date right now, from last year, we implemented a lot of changes, but we're still up almost 2% in attendance from last year. Our enrollment in just 1 year has increased over 100 students. And so not only does that, just show that students want to come to our school and be there, and we're, regaining the students, we're not recruiting students from the west side of Houston. We don't want students driving an hour to get to our school. But we would love for students who are zoned to our school and are from that community to be proud of their community, be proud of where they're from, and empower them to take ownership of their communities again. And that's what we're seeing. And then, the other thing that we're doing is, this year we've already committed to this summer. We have almost 30 internships with our partners that we're funding and they're funding, a combination of both for our students. So their junior year, they can have internships, they can work with these partners, then go to college, pursue what they want to pursue, and still maintain these connections and realize there are other opportunities. You can be a research scientist at Texas A&M. You can be, an environmental justice worker with, one of our partners. You can do all these different things, and it starts in high school to work with our partners and really understand what do our partners in the community need from our students, and how can we provide them now, get them connected now so it's real, it's tangible. And so those are some metrics that we think are huge wins for FUR.
So let's open it up. And what I'd ask is if you have a question or thought if you would identify yourself, where you're from, that would be very helpful to those keeping notes. Who wants to start? Yeah, please. And there are microphones right here, and I think the power works for everything now.
Hi, I'm Holly Bofi. I'm on the State Education Board in Louisiana, and I just want to dig in on the last comment you made about Algebra 1. So my question is, how does Algebra 1 learning look different for your students in this environment, and what do you attribute the gains to?
I think a few things. At our school, we really focus on being a learning organization and not, teaching to a test or a bureaucratic sense. And so, we want to empower our teachers to be leaders, designers, and guides to instruction. And I'm glad you said, what does it look like at our school? Because our school's different, right? We have a lot of students, a lot of our students who are new to the country or come in with limited English skills. We have instructors that, can go back and forth between English and Spanish, and that makes a huge difference. But in addition to that, our students talking to them, in focus groups, they want some structure, and students want to feel that they're being successful, and so, we either, people say, a good classroom looks like there's group work, right? But we talk to kids and, they get nervous about group work because we've all experienced, right? If you're the smart person in the group, you're doing all the work and, everyone else isn't. So what looks different in our classroom is that our work is designed around the kids in that classroom and based on their needs. And so if a student needs authenticity to feel that, their math is meaningful, and then so we'll get teachers to design field-based learning experiences for them. They'll work with the science teachers, they'll go, we'll get a charter bus or whatever they need to take them to do a trash audit and, really make it authentic if they need, affirmation. So we really look at, these design qualities that we build into the work to really understand our kids. And so for a teacher, that may look different from class to class. And so but in our algebra classes, we do have a lot of structure. We utilize technology, and we ensure that our students feel prepared, because a lot of times our students have never passed a state exam. Or they've passed very few and they haven't experienced success. And for students like that to experience success, they feel confident in their learning, and it's a little less scary when they go to take that exam. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that too, because I'm really proud of our algebra work, and it looks very similar. So although we say we're problem-based and we're heavily invested in the community, our mathematics classrooms look like good classrooms, just like our English classrooms look like great classrooms. So our learning in those is highly personalized. Every student, like we use competency-based grading, so every student's kind of aware of where they're at on all of the different learning goals that are a component of that course. And students are doing a lot of independent and small group work along building skills in the areas they have need, so that when we do those place-based learning experiences or partnerships or interdisciplinary collaborations, they have the skills to be successful in them. And so it's very similar to what Stephen's doing, because I think really great instruction that's tied to like that personalized learning is really what drives our students forward.
And I think what also is a little bit different too is our teachers are working together. Mm-hmm. We always talk about teachers wanting to, collaborate cross-curricularly, but really what happens is when you bring teachers together to have conversations, teachers do not get enough time in classrooms to have conversations. Oftentimes in schools, especially high need schools, those conversations are just focused on data and intervention. But we have our algebra team partnered with our science team really heavily, and when they do their field-based learning experiences, they're saying, hey, I can cover this in algebra, you can do this in biology, and when we're out there with our university partners and we're measuring water quality, this is what we're doing. And so these things are just naturally happening, but the kids see a university professor working alongside their teacher or with them when they're out there, and I think it gives it some relevance, and I think that having that also leads to increased rigor in the classroom, because it's something that we're heavy on policy. That's why we have some of our partners, right? When we're talking about environmental justice, we don't want our kids just to measure their water quality coming out of their faucet. We want to have them talk to professors that can tell them, hey, this is the policy work happening. If you want to make a change, this is the kind of work that we need, and this is the direction you need to go.
So if I could just follow up on the teacher piece for a second. In the United States, of the 35 most developed nations, we have our teachers on their feet in the classroom teaching more than any other nation. You're talking about increased time for collaboration. That's a policy matter. Many states actually say duty-free lunch period or X amount of hours for PD, and that's it. How do you handle that?
Right, so, in Texas, we have a 30-minute duty-free lunch period, and over 2 weeks, you have to have 450 minutes of planning time, with each planning session, or each conference period not being less than 45 minutes, right? So, as a principal, we're given the autonomy in our district to make our own bell schedules, right? And so, really, some of these issues, you have to work within, your policy constraints. And if you prioritize collaboration and teachers working together, that's the role of the principal, right? The role of the principal is to designate resources and to designate time for teachers. And so our teachers have over 90 minutes every single day. And so, that means for me, I could, take 2 of those periods a week if I wanted to do professional learning. But, that really, you have to work within those parameters. But, principals, pretty sure they can make it happen if that's what they value.
I would gladly accept additional parameters to give my teachers more professional collaboration time.
Yes. Okay, why don't you go, and then after you.
So Randy
Yes.
DeHoff from Colorado. We've heard about competency-based learning, the restraints of seat time, all those things, and how policies impact that. And we've got a district in Colorado that's gone full-blown competency-based, has been fighting with the accountability system ever since they did it. So my question really is to you, Governor, what advice would you give to state board members and state legislators here on how they can, some quick things they can do to give districts and schools that flexibility they need around that accountability system?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think you have to be looking at, is there an alternative to straight seat time? Look, I look at it this way. This is the way I explained it to a few constituents one time. When I go in to buy a car, I don't ask how many hours and days did it take. I want a car that took 180 days. I don't want a car any more or less. I want the quality of the car, don't I? Well, that's what we're talking about with education. And so whether you want to start with some pilots with people that are already underway, and some states have done that, whether you want to give districts and states the option, districts and schools, the option to go to competency-based. Remember, too, that these school leaders are going to have to also be able to explain this to the community, because you can have, I've been to a couple of town meetings, as all of us have, but a couple of town meetings where once you're deviating from the ordinary schedule, people get concerned. So you have to explain that as well, and why it is that your two students that you gave an example, one's moving here, one's moving here. But I think the first thing, in a number of states have already undertaken at least some initial measures to look at competency-based, but you're going to have to, I think, be willing to be more flexible and give districts the ability and schools the ability to work with it and gradually to develop. You're going to have to deal with, anybody here familiar with the weeby phenomenon? So I was in office a year and I did something, and no use going into it, but I did it at spur of the moment. I should have consulted more, but anyway, it upset a lot of public employees. And so I walked down the hall one day of the Capitol, and this civil servant came up to me, and she looked at me and smiled and said, Governor, we don't really agree with what you just did. And I explained, we had a reasonable discussion. She said, I'm a weeby. And I said, what's that? She said, we be here before you come, and we be here before you go, after you go. And so you've got to be able to develop so the weeby phenomenon doesn't set in. These leaders have to be able to communicate with the public, as do you, and about why it's important, so that that change is now part of the culture, not just an episodic event that gets reversed as soon as you leave or they leave. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, this lady was next, and then if I could turn to you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jade Olivia. I am a former Baltimore City Public Schools teacher, and I really appreciate everything that you all, have shared about your XQ schools, particularly around the talent that you have with educators in the classroom, and how it sounds to me as if, Mr. Stapleton, your teachers relate really well to your students and your particular population, which to me sounded a lot like Black and brown students, majority. And I appreciate that, because that's something that, coming from Baltimore City Public Schools, I did not see with my peers in our classrooms. I'm wondering, how do you all at XQ find your school leadership, recruit for that talent, and find a good fit for those leading the schools that you have across the states? And as well, how do you find the educators for your classrooms that will be the best fit with your students? And what does that look like in terms of collaboration? And if it's not a good fit, how do you transition or make it so that those teachers do find themselves with their students?
So I think there are actually two questions. How does XQ work and identify the leaders, if indeed it does? And then within the school, how do you change that, shape that culture, and work with the teachers?
So I can take the XQ piece, because it's actually the shorter piece, and then I want to hand it over to these guys. So because of our model, since they're not, our XQ schools are schools that we're in partnership with, but each one of them is their own school. So they have their own structure for providing leadership. Now, when we're looking at, like in the initial competition, our judges were looking at the leadership structure, who they were proposing to be leadership in our schools. And in our partnership with districts and with the state of Rhode Island, there is a very intentional equity lens, particularly around, in a past life at another organization when I worked a lot on this issue of teacher diversity, which should not be an issue, but absolutely is an issue in almost every state, I believe in every state. So that's something that we're very aware of, but a lot of the work of choosing leadership actually comes from the schools themselves. So I want to actually let you guys talk about that a little bit.
Thank you for that. Yes, our school's about 80% Latino, 20% African American, and, like we said, 96% low ACS. And, part of our hiring practices are asking teachers, some tough questions. In addition to, things like if, 95% of your students fail, what do you do next? And, you want to hear a response like, that's on me as the educator. You have to let teachers know that this place is different than anywhere you've ever worked. And that the work is going to be hard, and explain that, our students have deficits. And so that they've come with, learning gaps, I guess, if you will. And so it's going to be hard to work. All of our students aren't going to be at the same level, and you may have to toe the line a little bit, and you're going to, be expected, to work harder. And I think, listening to responses like that, and then just recruiting teachers who want to be there and who really understand. There are a lot of teachers who, come in and they see, for high school that was rebuilt in 2017, and it's a beautiful school, and, they have no idea where they are. And so, we take, our teachers on this tour, in the summertime to kind of not only, it exposes them to where students are. It's not like a tour of the neighborhood, but it's really helping them design their lessons for their kids. And so we want teachers who want our students to learn and who believe in the ability of all students and to listen to their voice and to take that into consideration. And so I think, part of that's on the recruiting side, is getting teachers who can answer the questions about the school that they need to and come in knowing about it, and people are committed. Then on the same side, if it wasn't something where they thought this wasn't what it was going to be, having those tough conversations. Yes, you may be a great teacher, in a different school, but it's just not here. You are going to work harder here. It is more difficult. There is more emotional, trauma that our students come with, and you're gonna worry about them. And having those tough conversations and being honest is the best way to help someone. They could honestly be a great teacher somewhere else, but just maybe not, at our school.
Our school is about 48% white, 25% black, 25% Hispanic. I want our faculty to, and that's about in line with exactly what our district profile is. I want our faculty to mirror our student body exactly. I want our students to see people who are like them, teaching them and being successful. And so, one, we need to be really intentional about our hiring practices, but two, we also need to hire for values, and that's a major initiative at our school. Is the whole interview process is highly values driven, because I want a person coming in, I can work on a lot of the pedagogy and the instruction with someone, but having a value system and a vision for teaching and learning that's in line with our mission is really, really important to us. And so when those teachers come in, usually they're already in the right mindset, and then we start doing work around social emotional learning. We do trauma-informed practices work all throughout the year with our teachers. We do implicit bias training with our teachers. And we also have a person on our staff who wanted to take this role, which was wonderful for me, but they're essentially kind of a advisory and cultural coach for our teachers. And it doesn't matter what interaction they see, but if they see a teacher-student interaction that's contentious, or some kind of interaction that could be optimized, we'll say, for the school environment, they'll step in and be like, so here's what the student was saying, here's what you were saying, let's start looking at how that could have been improved. And we do a lot of restorative practices in our school, not just with the students, but with the faculty as well. And really, we're just trying to build a culture that's highly mindful of that, I'd say.
And, I think in Houston, it's so large in Houston that, having diversity in our teaching population, whether we have white teachers, African American, Latino teachers, those applicants just come no matter what. And so it's really looking at, do our teachers understand where our students are coming from and how to have high expectations for them? Because, sometimes, we do have, teachers that, come in and they feel like they want to save students, or they have this certain mentality, no matter what race they are, right? And so, and oftentimes it sometimes backfires because, students often don't want to hear about, how great your life is and what you did. They're worried about the now, and they're worried about getting their grades and going to work or whatever it may be. And so really, like we said, tuning into those SEL practices and having teachers, start every day fresh with a student and holding circles with them to feel that our students have someone, no matter, who they are, what they look like, or where they came from, that cares about them. And that's what we really want. That's what we hire for.
So I want to let's thank this panel and what they provided for us. My hope is that they'll be willing to stay around a little bit, take some questions if you have some. Unfortunately, one thing that is true at this conference, which is all about change, time is still a constant. So we've talked a lot about different areas of practice, but the policies that affect them are so important. Competency-based advancement versus seat time. The personalization of learning, which is the ability to meet every student where the student is and work with them, as opposed to simply slapping on an arbitrary metric and making them work through it. The whole incredibly important role of teacher support, teacher practices, and how we enable teachers to be the true professionals they are, particularly through professional learning communities. And another area to get into, which we didn't get into, is how do we get more of these schools started and set an environment in which communities are encouraged to do that. So I want to thank very much XQ and ExcelinEd and certainly our practitioners. And just remember, we've got a class right now in 3rd grade, 10 years from now, that will be walking across that stage, a class of 2030. How do we change things now, not only for those that are already going to walk across earlier, but what do we undertake in the next 2 years, 3 years that truly changes high school for them, so that when they do graduate, they are truly college career ready and ready to be citizens of this country. Thank you.